Hi there, this is John Wilkinson again from History Made Easier. And this presentation looking at factors to the Wall Street crash, as well as looking at factors that explain the crash, we'll look at three key factors that are linked to it. So let's begin with what caused the crash. The focus point in your syllabus is how far was speculation responsible for the Wall Street crash. Now, any question with how far in it must have more than one factor to weigh in order to reach a proper answer. And I would suggest you weigh the extent to which speculation caused the crash against the economy's more fundamental problems, as well as an element of good old human nature, greed. And that's how I would structure my notes. You would be covered for an A question on speculation, more than covered on a why question, and for a how far or to what extent question. And you should already have covered the fundamental flaws to some extent when you looked at the booming economy. So at this point, you should only have to add to notes already made. You should have notes on overproduction and some brief notes on overconfidence, the state of rural America, the problems with older industries, and the uneven distribution of wealth. And end this with some notes on the fact that share prices were overpriced. Then you will be able to focus on speculation, noting the role good old greed had to play in it. So let's move to speculation. You need to be able to show a basic understanding of the role shares play in financing companies and the dangers of playing the market when you don't know what you're doing, because these new speculators didn't, and when it's an unregulated market. There is also a subtle difference between investing and speculating. One is for long-term gain, the other for a quick profit. Add to that the dangers of buying on the margin, and you have the perfect storm ready to let loose. And once confidence is lost, all is lost. And I should say that you can also add into the mix the responsibility of the banks. As for the crash itself, well, it was spread over 4.5 working days, with a weekend separating the first two from the last two. Have a sound idea of what happened, but don't get bogged down in detail. And so to the impact of the crash. To cover all possible questions, and to properly understand the crash too, I suggest you consider the ways in which the crash impacted on the economy. Farm closures, production levels and bankruptcies, as well as on farmers and workers. And I would consider what we called the vicious cycle that took hold. And for each of these, I would be armed with data, but also the human impact. For the Great Depression was, above all else, a human story. For farmers, it was a story of bankruptcies and evictions, and they had the Dust Bowl to contend with as well. For workers, it was a story of unemployment and evictions, symbolised by soup kitchens and the Hoovervilles. And this brings us to the social consequences of the crash, and people suffered in different ways as well as to different degrees. For workers, try to distinguish between the middle class and the working class, ways in which women were affected, and think about the racial dimension too. Hoover's response. Hoover, as you know, was called the do-nothing president. Was this entirely fair? That's going to be the main focus of this part of your revision. Clearly, Hoover did act, but did he do enough? Or was it impossible to see how bad the situation was, at least at first? But do also consider the level and nature of unrest in America. Was America close to civil war? 1932 and the Bonus March will be a key focal point. But don't forget the trouble at Henry Ford's car plant in Detroit, and the reactions from farmers is worth noting too. But don't get carried away. 3 out of 4 workers were still in work in 1932, and the cinema continued to boom. And finally, you might well get a question on why Roosevelt won the presidential election of 1932. Of course, you would begin with Hoover's handling of the Depression. But don't stop there. Consider the life stories of the two men and their underpinning philosophies, as well as what Hoover had done before the crash and what Roosevelt had done as state governor. In every way, the two men stood in stark contrast with each other. And it was the same with their campaigns. It's one of those questions in which I talk about the attack and defence approach to history. A goal is scored. Do you praise the attacking side or criticise the defence? Well, as in football, so in history. Do both. Hoover got it badly wrong. Roosevelt got it exactly right. And that's where I'll leave it. As always, I thank you for listening, and I remind you to check out my website, History Made Easier. Keep going with that revision. It will pay off. And the very best of luck to you with the exam. But for now, cheers.